Psalm 76, the title of this psalm is To the Chief Musician on Neginoth, a psalm or song of Asaph. So we are continuing with Psalms of Asaph, and this one is to the chief musician on Neginoth. That should be familiar a little bit, at least, because that is means that it's meant to be played or accompanied by stringed instruments. That's what that Neginoth indicates. We'll begin reading in verse 1. It says, "In Judah is God known. His name is great in Israel. In Salem also is his tabernacle, and his dwelling place in Zion. There brake he the arrows of the bow, the shield, and the sword, and the battle. Selah. Thou art more glorious and excellent than the mountains of prey. The stout-hearted are spoiled. They have slept their sleep, and none of the men of might have found their hands. At thy rebuke, O God of Jacob, both the chariot and horse are cast into a deep sleep. Thou, even thou, art to be feared, and who may stand in thy sight when once thou art angry? Thou didst cause judgment to be heard from heaven. The earth feared and was still, when God arose to judgment to save all the meek of the earth. Selah. Surely the wrath of man shall praise thee. The remainder of the wrath shalt thou restrain. Vow and pay unto the Lord your God. Let all that be round about him bring presents unto him that ought to be feared. He shall cut off the spirit of princes. He is terrible to the kings of the earth." So, going back to verse 1, this is, again, a continuation of the series that we're in. So these psalms are somewhat connected. We saw that Psalm 75 was like an answer to the prayer of Psalm 74, where in Psalm 74, Asaph is asking God to remember his people, remember his congregation, to deliver them. And Psalm 75 is giving praise to God and understanding our right place in comparison to him, that he is Lord, he is God, he is Almighty, and that he has the power to save and that he will save. And Psalm 76 continues with that, in that this is showing the glory of God and his victory over the enemy. So verse 1 says, "In Judah is God known. His name is great in Israel." In Judah is God known. We're going to look at that for just a second, because that's something that is really meaningful. And it's something that we don't necessarily think about all the time because it's just part of our lives. It's just part of our everyday walk as Christians. In Judah is God known. He's not guessed at. He's not made up. He's not a fairy tale. He's known. He is a being with whom the people of Judah have a relationship. And we have a relationship with our Savior, Jesus Christ. And we're connected to him through the Holy Spirit. And we can know God. And we get to know God better by studying his Word. And so Judah has the Scriptures. And Judah, as we'll see on Mount Zion, is God's dwelling place. And there's the tabernacle, the place where God chooses to dwell. They have that connection to God. So in Judah is God known. His name is great in Israel. In Salem also is his tabernacle and his dwelling place in Zion. So we're given specific geographical locations here as well, and that's something else to consider. So this place, the people in this place Judah, the country, the nation of Israel. God is known there. And it's in this place where he has his tabernacle, in Salem. That's Jerusalem. It's also called Salem way back in Genesis, whenever Abraham visits it and meets the priest Melchizedek. Melchizedek was a priest of God in Salem. That's this city. And his dwelling place in Zion. And so that's Mount Zion. That's the tabernacle. No, we're going to see that this is a prophetic psalm. And what we're going to get into, and I'll just go ahead and give it away now, it's a prophetic psalm about the destruction and the defeat of the Assyrian armies that come against Jerusalem while Hezekiah is king. And so what many people claim there, and not only that, it's also a type of Jesus' victory at his second coming. But what we see often with people who study this psalm or try to exposit this psalm is that this is a different Asaph, or it's somebody that is in the spiritual succession, a spiritual descendant of Asaph, who's writing this in his same style. One thing that I think is that, yes, we see that there is a reference to Judah and Israel, but it does not appear that the psalmist is recognizing a difference between Judah and Israel as two separate nations here in verse 1, which would be very clear had this been written closer to the time of the destruction of the Assyrians. And so, rather than to make it a prophetic psalm, people want to read it as if that it was written at the time, locally, of that event. And so you would have, I don't know that you would see this, that you would see the recognition of Judah and Israel as just one entity if it were written at that time. Because Judah is one of the tribes. It wasn't always the name of the southern kingdom. Judah is one of the 12 tribes. Judah is where Jerusalem is. That was in the inheritance of the tribe of Judah. And so Judah, at the time of David, Solomon, when Asaph would have been writing Psalms, it's in Israel. There's not that disconnect. There's not the 10 northern tribes of Israel and the 2 southern tribes of Judah and Benjamin. It's just Judah is in Israel. So I think you would see I don't know that Asaph would have referred to Judah and Israel in the same breath in that way. And at the time of the Assyrian destruction, I highly doubt that anybody would say that God's name is great in Israel, which would be the 10 northern tribes, because Assyria had taken them out. Assyria had already, at that time, whenever they were attacking Jerusalem, they had already conquered the 10 northern tribes. They had already done the importing and exporting of the people that the Assyrians were known for. They didn't keep the people in that place. They brought a bunch of people from there to other parts of their kingdom, and people from other parts of their kingdom into there. That's where you get the origin of the Samaritans that lived in the region of Samaria, that were sort of part Jewish and not fully Jewish. And also they had part Jewish traditions, but not fully Jewish traditions. They didn't. They created it's like they created a separate religion. So I think that combined with what we see here, in Salem also is his tabernacle and his dwelling place in Zion. Asaph here uses the word tabernacle. He doesn't say temple, he says tabernacle. If this were written at the time the local events that are being prophesied about here, as far as we're concerned, they're being prophesied about here. If it were written at that time, I would expect to see the word temple. I wouldn't expect to see the word tabernacle, because Solomon would have already built the temple. It would already be there. Now, tabernacle is also, the temple functions as the tabernacle. So that's not definitive proof, and I'm not going to claim that it is definitive proof, but that's not what you would expect. You wouldn't expect to see this close relationship between Judah and Israel and the usage of the word tabernacle. You would expect to see probably just Judah. You wouldn't expect to see the word Israel at that time, and you wouldn't expect to see the word tabernacle. You would expect to see the word temple. So again, not definitive proof, but I don't believe that this is a psalmist that is writing in the style of Asaph as a so-called spiritual descendant. I don't believe this is another or separate person named Asaph. I think this is the same Asaph we've been following, and that he's inspired as he's writing this psalm, which is a psalm of prophecy, which is no different than many of the other psalms that we've read, which are psalms of prophecy. And you can look at Psalm 22 as one of the clearest examples of a psalm of prophecy, a psalm of Jesus up on the cross. And it's clear that David wouldn't have had much understanding about what he was writing because crucifixion had not yet been implemented. But what he's describing in that psalm is a crucifixion. So I think people get too caught up in their unwillingness to, it seems to me that I don't want to try to make too many accusations that are baseless, but it seems to me that it's pretty clear throughout other psalms that we have prophecy. Why is there such an attempt to deny that there's prophecy here? It's like when you go to study and when you go to look at different various resources online or anywhere, you come across so many things that say, well, this is just a different Asaph, it was written later. And it's like there's just no thought put into it. It's like it's obvious to them that it's a different Asaph. But to me, when I read it, it's obvious to me that it's prophecy. I don't know where you get that difference. I don't know what the divider is. I don't know where the crossroads or the fork is in the road from where they are and from where I am, where we've split. I have a feeling it goes way further back than Psalm 76 because they just have a different way of thinking and perceiving the scriptures as they read them. But that seems to be the norm, and with a lot of things. So I'll pull a J. Vernon McGee and I'll say you can go and you can read this and you can believe whatever you want to about it. But if you want to be right, just listen to what I had to say. That is a joke, but I get things wrong all the time. So, yep. But that's what we have here. We have this, and then moving away from the discussion of who Asaph is or when it was written, we have here 4 geographic locations. These 4 geographic locations are important because they represent a real relationship that God had to this specific people in these specific places. These locations are not London, England. They're not Seattle, Washington, Houston, Texas, Washington, D.C., New York, New York. They're not those. They are Judah in Israel, the city of Jerusalem, on Mount Zion, in the tabernacle temple. God had a very specific relationship with these people in these places. Now, that does not mean or take away from God's omnipresence, which we know is real, not just from the New Testament, but also throughout the Old Testament. God is everywhere. He sees everything. He's in all places. So it's not saying that God is here in Jerusalem on Mount Zion and not other places. That he's here and he's here. It's just that he has chosen this, and it says his dwelling place in Zion. In other places in Scripture, you see that he has set his name in the temple. He has set his name in the city of Jerusalem. And so that's a place that can be identified with him specifically. Again, where were the people to offer their sacrifices? They bring them to the priests, and they bring them to where the tabernacle. When David was king, he moved everything. He made Jerusalem the capital city, and he moved the tabernacle. Everything moved to Jerusalem. Before that, it had been in Shiloh. So that was moved. It says in verse 3, "There brake he the arrows of the bow, the shield, and the sword, and the battle." Selah. So here's a place, there's a people that know God. They have the means to know God. He's given them their scriptures. He's given them prophets. He's given them judges. He's set up their king. There is a people here that knows God, and he's established his dwelling place there with these people. And here he's defending that place. It says he brake the arrows of the bow, the shield, of the sword, and the battle. God has set his name here in this place, and he is defending it. It's being assaulted. It says in verse 4, "Thou art more glorious and excellent than the mountains of prey." And there's a couple different ways you could look at that term, mountains of prey. One way, and this is where I'm going to diverge with J. Vernon McGee, and say that if you're not going to go along with him. If you want to be right, you're going to go along with me. That's the last time I'll use that joke this morning. That the mountains of prey, what he says is that, well, Jerusalem, there's been 27 recorded events of that city being besieged. Now, there's all kinds of other things that go on throughout history, but specifically having a siege against Jerusalem, a formal military siege, there's roughly 27 structured military attacks against that city throughout history. And so he says that is the mountains of prey, and that this is a comparison of God's glory to the glory of Jerusalem. I think that what's actually being said here is that I wouldn't say Jerusalem is the mountains of prey. I would read that as it says it here, and this is what I thought as I read it and as I studied into it. I believe I'm correct about it. But that the mountains of prey is just referring to mountains filled with wildlife. You know, this thing that God has created on this earth that he's created, with this wildlife that he's created that's good to eat. You know, we, in our supermarket culture, you know, where you just go to the store to get whatever you want, you know, we forget sometimes about these things, unless you are still in the business of farming or of ranching of some kind, unless you're still in the business of actual food production, or you produce your food yourself. Most people in our country, in our culture, are not going to immediately identify with this. But the mountains of prey, to have animals up on a mountain that's just teeming with wildlife, like deer, like ibex or goats, or just these animals that are good and they're healthy and they're and they're easy to be preyed upon, so that you can fill your dinner table. You know, to get something different than mutton or lamb, which is what a lot of Jewish people would be used to eating as their meat. Either sheep or cattle is what they'd be primarily used to, but imagine a mountain filled with wildlife, and maybe there are wild cattle, or maybe there's just cattle with mountains on it, and maybe the mountain also has some ibex or goats, or maybe it has some deer, some venison, and there's just a variety of these things. The same kind of variety that you see when you go into Kroger or Walmart or Myers, if you happen to stray too far away from where we live, where there's no Myers. We go in and you can just be amazed at all of the different choices that you have at the store. And that's where we go to get our food. Well, imagine, these people didn't have that. So you have to take that out of your mind. But it's like here's this place that's full of bounty. There's this place that's a mountain of prey. It's ready. It's ready for us to just come and get what we need. That God has just provided it there. And so that's kind of what's being said here, this place of bounty. In the same way that whenever there's an extremely good harvest with nice, big, juicy, ripe fruit, whether that be grapes or whether it be melons or whether it be whatever it is. There's something, I think, that God has put in us as part of our survival mechanism, that it's just whenever you see a great big giant, even if I don't even like fruit that much, but whenever I see a great big giant juicy red apple, even though I don't really have any desire to eat it, because I don't like apples that much or fruits that much, there's just something in me that just says, this is good. This is how it's supposed to be. This is right. This is what this apple is meant to be. This is what God meant it to turn into. And so, we have God has placed within us, and the evolutionary biologists would say it's the mutation of the genes that led us to this. But no, God placed within us a relationship with food. Now, some of us have a worse relationship with food than others. I don't have a great relationship with food. I think food gets the better of me all the time, at least here recently. But God gave us a biological relationship with food because it's part of what we need to keep living, to keep moving. And so to see a mountain of prey is something that's good and that's normal. That's something that would be normal for any people of any civilization at any time, to see this glorious mountain with everything prepared. It's like going to it's just like going to Walmart and seeing the steak section and seeing that they've got that it's not sold out and that they've got the glorious ribeyes lined up ready to go. Not just the grade A, but and not just it's the prime and the premium. It's not just the great value brand. You've got the stuff that's not going to make you sick. And so it's like that, but just it's a natural thing. So God is more glorious than that. It's something He's provided. He's above that. Thou art more glorious and excellent than the mountains of prey. Verse 5. The stout-hearted are spoiled, they have slept their sleep, and none of the men of might have found their hands. And so this is where we get into the connection to God protecting Jerusalem from the Assyrian army. The stout-hearted are spoiled, they have slept their sleep, and none of the men of might have found their hands. At thy rebuke, O God of Jacob, both the chariot and horse are cast into a deep sleep. Thou, even thou, art to be feared, and who may stand in thy sight when once thou art angry? Thou didst cause judgment to be heard from heaven. The earth feared and was still when God arose to judgment to save all the meek of the earth. Selah. And so we're going to read very briefly in 2 Kings chapter 19. 2 Kings chapter 19. We'll start reading in verse 32. 2 Kings 19, beginning in verse 32, it says, "Therefore thus saith the Lord concerning the king of Assyria, He shall not come into this city, nor shoot an arrow there, nor come before it with shield, nor cast a bank against it. By the way that he came, by the same shall he return, and shall not come into this city, saith the Lord. For I will defend this city to save it for mine own sake, and for my servant David's sake." And it came to pass that night that the angel of the Lord went out and smote in the camp of the Assyrians 185,000, that's 185,000. And when they arose early in the morning, behold, they were all dead corpses. So Sennacherib king of Assyria departed, and went and returned and dwelt at Nineveh. And it came to pass, as he was worshipping in the house of Nisroch his god, that Adramelech and Sharezer his son smote him with the sword, and they escaped into the land of Armenia, and Esarhaddon his son reigned in his stead. So, you see, and this is an example we refer to fairly regularly, but this is a battle that was fought, and it says, who fought it? It says, the angel of the Lord went out and smote in the camp of the Assyrians 185,000. People in Israel, people in Judah, people in Jerusalem did not have to raise a finger. What was required and what happened, they didn't have to raise a finger, but they dropped to their knees. And they prayed to God, and God took care of it. And so we see here, this is God's victory achieved over the enemy while they were in their sleep. Turn back to Psalm 76, looking at verse 5. "The stout-hearted are spoiled. They have slept their sleep, and none of the men of might have found their hands." They didn't have a chance before God. And it's something that cannot be. I didn't do all the math, but if you assume, actually, I'll just pull out my calculator right now. If you assume, and this would be a very big assumption, if you assume that there's one person for a second, so that's 60 people per minute, and then you assume that throughout the night, let's just be generous and just say 12 hours. So 60 people per minute at 60 minutes an hour. So 60 times 60 times 12. 43,200. You need to do that more than 4 times. That's more than 4 people per second dying over a 12-hour period. No human being has that speed. No human being has that efficiency with a sword. Now, we know that we have weapons of war that can cause that kind of destruction very quickly. But no human being has the physical power to just on their own do that. I don't even care if you've got guns. You're still not going to do that. Now, what we don't know and what hasn't been said is in in 2 Kings 19, it says the angel of the Lord went out. Now, maybe the angel of the Lord had other angels working under him. Maybe he had other people in his company, in his platoon, whatever you want to say, whatever military grouping you have. Maybe they had more than one, and in which case, maybe so, but it doesn't matter. Because whether you want to try to do the math and make it make sense and say, well, there had to be more than one, or you want to say there were multiple, it doesn't matter, because either way, it's God's power, and God can do what he wants with his power. God has the power to make it so that there was just one. He has the power to make it so that there were 50. It doesn't matter. You don't have to spend your time, trying to figure that stuff out. Just trust that He had His hand on it. But that's verse 5, and then verse 6, it says, "At thy rebuke, O God of Jacob, both the chariot and the horse are cast into a deep sleep." It says, "Thou, even thou, art to be feared, and who may stand in thy sight when once thou art angry?" And this is a recognition that God is to be feared, that He is powerful, He is mighty. It says, "Thou didst cause judgment to be heard from heaven. The earth feared and was still." And could you imagine, on either side, I don't care which side you're on, could you imagine being there, being present, either in the walls of Jerusalem or on the walls of Jerusalem or outside Jerusalem in the camps of that army, and wake up that morning and just see that there's nobody left to fight the battle, that there's no battle to be had, that God's already won, He's already done it, that everybody you thought was going to come kill you, or everybody you knew that you were prepared to go into battle with, is just gone. And it was that quick. You didn't even wake up out of your sleep, and everybody around you is just gone. 185,000 of them. That, to me, it's. I don't know that there's many people that would be able to live a normal life after that. And we know the king Sennacherib didn't live a normal life after that. He left, he departed. His first thing he did was go to Nineveh, start praying to his God, and then his son said, "Well, this is a weak man, he's a weak king, it's his fault we lost, he did something wrong," and so they took his life. And then they ran away because they were worried they were going to get in trouble for regicide and patricide, both together. So, God caused His judgment to be heard from heaven. The earth feared and was still. I couldn't imagine any shouts of joy there based on what this is saying. It's stillness. It's silent. There's just a time where you just have to process what's going on. The mind can't keep up with God in that way. And so it says in verse 9, "When God arose to judgment to save all the meek of the earth." And this is where I said that not only is this a prophetic event for the time of the Assyrian siege on Jerusalem, but it's also a type of Jesus' victory at His second coming. When God arose to judgment to save all the meek of the earth. Now, some could attribute that to Asaph being biased and saying, well, all the meek of the earth, we're right here in Jerusalem. We are the ones who are meek. We are the ones who are good and right and just and holy. I don't think that that's what the Holy Spirit inspired there. I think that the Holy Spirit is inspiring Asaph to write this because it's also referring to an event much, much, much further into the future that is not just centered and localized in Jerusalem, but is very much related to the people related to that event, but is a worldwide event where Jesus comes and defeats the enemy off of the globe. Not just out of the city of Jerusalem, but off the globe entirely. He saves all the meek of the earth. Verse 10, "Surely the wrath of man shall praise thee, the remainder of wrath shalt thou restrain." And so this is a verse that gives us, even whatever lasting wrath, whatever lasting anger, whatever lasting emotion that continues on after God's victory. God, it says, the remainder of wrath shalt thou restrain. God is above that. And he's so above it that those who remain, whatever remains, is turned into praise for him. It says in verse 11, "Vow and pay unto the Lord your God. Let all that be round about him bring presents unto him that ought to be feared." Again, I think this is where we see this is a type of, or a prophecy of, future events that even today still not have occurred, because the Assyrians, once they lost that battle in the middle of the night, once they left, they left. It's not like they came and started converting and offering sacrifices at the temple and things like that. That's not what happened. They didn't start bringing tributes to God, to the temple, or to the tabernacle, or anywhere. They went home. But here it says, "Vow and pay unto the Lord your God. Let all that be round about him bring presents unto him that ought to be feared." It's been a little while. It's been long enough that I can justify it. We're going to turn to Zechariah 14. Zechariah 14. Beginning in verse 16, it says, "And it shall come to pass that every one that is left of all the nations which came up against Jerusalem shall even go up from year to year to worship the King, the Lord of hosts, and to keep the Feast of Tabernacles. And it shall be that whoso will not come up of all the families of the earth unto Jerusalem to worship the King, the Lord of hosts, even upon them shall be no rain. And if the family of Egypt go not up and come not, that have no rain, there shall be the plague, wherewith the Lord will smite the heathen that come not up to keep the Feast of Tabernacles. This shall be the punishment of Egypt and the punishment of all nations that come not up to keep the Feast of Tabernacles. In that day there shall be upon the bells of the horses holiness unto the Lord, and the pots in the Lord's house shall be like the bowls before the altar. Yea, every pot in Jerusalem and in Judah shall be holiness unto the Lord of hosts, and all they that sacrifice shall come and take of them, and seed therein. And in that day there shall be no more the Canaanite in the house of the Lord of hosts." So we see that people will be coming up. They will be coming up regularly. Now it doesn't mention the bringing of presents. It just mentioned that they're coming for the Feast of Tabernacles. But I can only imagine that if you're coming to visit the place where God Himself, Jesus, the Son of God, God Himself, the second member of the Trinity, is reigning on earth as King over the world, if you're coming up to Him, and you are a leader of a nation or leader of a family or whatever, you're probably bringing some kind of gift. Just probably. I mean, we only have a handful of 1,000 years of history backing that up, that whenever a king or whenever a group of people comes to visit a king that's mightier and more glorious than they are, they bring some kind of gift. One case in point, the Queen of Sheba brings gifts to Solomon. Many other kings brought gifts to Solomon. Solomon's a really good example and is one of the biggest types of the millennial kingdom, because he had a kingdom in which it was peaceful the entire time he reigned. And people came from all over the world and brought him gifts, and the Jews were extremely blessed during that time. Sounds a little bit familiar. Just a little. So it to me, that people will at that time that we read about in Zechariah 14 be bringing gifts to Jesus, which is in line with Psalm 76:11. It says in verse 12, "He shall cut off the spirit of princes. He is terrible to the kings of the earth." He shall cut off the spirit of princes. Who is the prince of the power of the air? Satan. Who is going to have 10 kings serving under him? The Antichrist, a servant of Satan. He shall cut off the spirit of princes. He is terrible to the kings of the earth. And we talked about that word terrible again. Terrible could mean frightful. It could mean scary. It could mean it can mean those words. It can also mean awe-inspiring. Terror is not just a sense of fright. It's also a sense of just. It's also a sense of awe. And so he is terrible to the kings of the earth. And I think he's terrible both ways. Both ways. They should be frightful and they should be awe-inspired. So, terror-stricken. That is Psalm 76. Are there any questions or comments this morning?